First of all, I'd like to thank Laura Zimmerman and the Center for New Words for giving me this opportunity to say a few words about Cynthia Enloe. I truly consider this an honor like no other. An opportunity like this calls for reflection, and it takes me back to the first time that I met Cynthia when I was a student at Clark University. Cynthia Enloe's influence and stature as a scholar, thinker, and writer goes worldwide. However, to use one of her own expressions, Cynthia Enloe, as you all know, is a woman who wears many hats. Tonight I would like to talk about not only Cynthia, the world-renowned scholar, but also Cynthia as a teacher and a mentor. When you enroll in a graduate program, you don't think you're going to finish it with more questions than when you started. But that's what happens when you study with Cynthia. Cynthia has a rare ability to encourage people to think. I have learned a lot from Cynthia about international relations, about militarisms, about feminisms. The list goes on. But what I most value from my graduate experience is not my dissertation or the knowledge I've gained, but an ability to inquire and to think in new and different ways. Cynthia may have written The Curious Feminist, and she is indeed a curious feminist, but she's also taught me to be a curious feminist, and that's what stays with me as I approach each new phase of my life. For tonight's introduction, I enlisted the help of a community of feminists from as far corners of the globe as Ohio, Australia, South Korea, Thailand, New York, Indiana, Palestine, and Trinidad, engaged in activities as varied as teaching in institutes of higher education, developing policy for the UN, organizing global conferences on women, implementing women's human rights, and generally agitating as feminists. Now, this community of women have one thing in common. Their lives while graduate students at Clark and much beyond have been touched by the curious feminist Cynthia Enloe. So here is what they have to say. I think the title of Cynthia's text not only epitomizes her insatiable appetite to learn, but also signals the ways in which I think and my pedagogy have been most impacted by her. Cynthia's generosity towards helping you nurture your mushrooming ideas and her willingness to learn, or as she often says, become smarter, by engaging you and your work now constantly resonates in my mind as I interact with my own students. I think another aspect of her capacity to encourage you to write your own words is her now infamous pre-research proposal questions, what is your hunch? In a similar spirit, Cynthia prompts you to honor and acknowledge what you already know without stalemating your own emerging curiosity about the gendered world in which we live. I learned from her the importance of context and comparative detailed analysis. Most importantly, I learned to constantly put my gender goggles on and keep my antennas up to make feminist sense of the politics around. The Curious Feminist. The title is so Enloe-esque. Peeping into the book's table of content, there's again the triple S's. Sneakers, silences, surprises. A sequence to the famous 3 B's. Bananas, beaches, and bases. That's a form that we cannot belittle. 3 S's, 3 B's remind me of Cynthia's unstated intent. Feminist ideas and analysis of the political significances in women's everyday life have to be well communicated. Reading Cynthia's book requires reading between the lines. Her topics are exactly as how she dresses. Cotton shirts, khaki slacks, and Converses. I wonder whether Cynthia will have anything to say about cosmetics and hair products. These items don't raise her curiosity. She goes for the simple, not the complexity of chemicals. But the simple is for Cynthia complicated. There are millions of stories to be told about women in cotton and garment and Converse industries. I particularly appreciate Cynthia's writing style in this era of intellectual postism. But I find myself at the end of her book realizing that I have to reread the whole thing again. Her words are deceptive and can be reread and reread as militarism keeps coming back in new forms. Cynthia reminds me of that fabulous line some of you will recall from the classic 1970 radical lesbian manifesto, The Woman Identified Woman. A lesbian is the rage of all women condensed to the point of explosion, but with one slight modification. Cynthia Enloe is the curiosity of all women condensed to the point of explosion. Above all, beyond the many qualities that make her so remarkable, her extraordinary humility, her strategic clarity, her incalculable daily gestures of generosity, large and small, the seriousness and respect she brings to every encounter, I think it is Cynthia's curiosity that in the end best defines her. She may be tiny, but she is fiercely energetic, indeed virtually atomic, in her drive to pose questions that will help us all think bigger and connect the dots. Equally importantly, the questions she poses are those that unlock our richest, most multifaceted, yet most humane accounts of ourselves and the worlds we inhabit. Like so many others, my life has been immeasurably enriched, and my own curiosity enlivened by knowing Cynthia, and benefiting from her engagement, her wisdom, and her example. So, Cynthia, in one of the essays in The Curious Feminist, you argue that one must learn to move away from their dissertation committees in order to write and think as a feminist, because that relationship of the student and the supervisor can be stifling. Well, certainly not when you happen to be the professor. You can encourage us to have feminist curiosity, be accountable to our work, and believe that makes a difference. And most importantly, you teach us never to forget to ask the question, where are the women? So now, without further ado, I'm so proud to present Cynthia Enloe, my teacher, mentor, and friend.
Now, don't you all want to go to UMass Boston and sign up for Elora's classes? Elora, that was just great. It is so wonderful. You know who's just arrived? Carol, I saw you. Yes, she's here. Carol, come out, wherever you are. This is Carol Cohn, my co-conspirator, but also the co-sponsor of this event. Yay! And Carol is actually in Curious Feminist as well. Being curious. I'm going to go sit on the stairs. And she's going to go sit on the stairs where all real thinking happens. Didn't you find that when you were a kid, if you had stairs, that your best thinking went on sort of sitting midway up and down the stairs? Wasn't that the best thing? I'm delighted to be here on this cold night. Feminists are many things, but one thing they are not is daunted. Right? So I'm just delighted to be here with all you undaunted folks, and to also be here in the room of the former New Words bookstore and the ever-enlivening Center for New Words. To warm ourselves up, let's give an applause for Center for New Words. This is the first and not the last of many events that will be coming up this spring for CNW. So is there there's a sign-up sheet here. Should we send it around?
Yes.
See? Somebody's got to organize here, right? And is there a pen? There's a pen. There's a pen, there's a clipboard, there's a sign-up. That's how the movement starts. You should know, amongst other things, and there will be lots of brochures up here, that the big event for CNW this spring is going to be WHAM 2. WHAM is Women and Media. See, this is good. That's Elise Cherry, the director of the board, the head of the board of the CNW. WHAM 2, Women and Media, exclamation point. WAM, exclamation point. And WHAM 2, which is the successor to WHAM 1, that was last year, is going to be held March
18th to the 20th.
18th to the 20th at the Gary Building. You know, the falling down, hip-looking building over at MIT. It'll really fall down after WHAM 2, I'm sure. But so be on the lookout if you're at all interested in trying to figure out, have an impact on the media as a feminist, or as somebody working in a progressive group who can't break into the media. WHAM 2 is designed so that we can learn how to do this. So that's coming up as the feature of what will be a exciting spring series. What I
Back up so the people in the back can see you because from this height.
Because I'm short. Oh. Okay. I don't have on my sneakers tonight, though. I have on cotton. Oh, well. What I thought might be interesting for all of us to do and to do together tonight is not me talk about the book, although I am more than happy to talk about the cover. You've got to look at this cover. But also about the interviews and why I included interviews in a book. I've never done that before. What is the politics of interviewing and being interviewed, and also the pieces at the end, which are the first time I've ever tried to write personally about my own childhood. Not a very extraordinary childhood, just one that seemed worth reflecting upon. I'm more than glad to talk about anything that is in the book or that you want to talk about the book. But I thought, you know what? This is an amazing group. Everybody look around. Right? Could we change the world? Could everybody in this room change the world? Yes. Right, we better. Right, yes, exactly, says Estelle. We better. So what I thought what might really be useful tonight is to try and talk about the war in Iraq and to try and talk about it now. This is January 27th. The alleged elections are happening on Sunday, January 30th. But there are other things happening as well. What I think is fair to call a national security state. And I use those words very advisedly, meaning...
The back of the stage.
Sure, come on.
It'd be like a revival meeting.
Yeah, right. Or a very hip, this is fun. This is a lot of fun.
I always like being close to you.
Yes, hi, Freddie. Yeah, hi there.
In the round.
Yeah, this is right. This is a lot of fun. But what I thought really might be good for us to do is to try and really figure out now, tonight, January 27th, how do you use feminist questioning, the kinds of questioning we've all spent years trying to hone for ourselves. And I don't mean we all end up with the same questions. How can we use feminist questioning to make sense of what is happening both in Iraq and in the United States at this particular moment in time? And the two events I think I want to really keep track of tonight are, one, the ongoing war in Iraq, combined with the election coming up on Sunday in Iraq, with what I think is a very dangerous further move, not the first move, further move towards creating what I think I would accurately call the national security state of the United States. That is, the United States government and we as part of it, whether we are passive, whether we are frustrated in our resistance, whether we aren't even following it because we have other things going on in our lives. The national security state is a very particular kind of state. It's been talked about by a lot of particularly male intellectuals, usually with no feminist curiosity. No feminist curiosity about the war in Iraq, no feminist curiosity about the election coming on Sunday, no feminist curiosity about this newest move in the United States' ongoing evolution of its political culture and its political institutions. So what I'd like to do is start with two scenes. And these are two scenes that I recently read about, and probably you all read about. I don't have any secret information. I have just the kind of information that all of us try to gather every day. And the first scene is in the Pentagon. And this I've gotten from Seymour Hersh, as well as the New York Times, and some other commentators. So now you're in the Pentagon. This is about January 15th in the Pentagon. in the meeting room, and it's a paneled conference room, are Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of State, Paul Wolfowitz, one of his chief deputies, Stephen Cambone, who is these are all civilians, by the way. Stephen Cambone, who is in the newly created post, newly created by Donald Rumsfeld when he came into the Secretary's position, of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. This post didn't exist before. And also Douglas Feith. Douglas Feith is on the same level with Cambone. They are joined in the room by not very many, and this is really important to think about when you think how militarization mixes with masculinity. There's only one uniformed officer in the room. That is, militarization is going to go on in this room, and it's going to get really deeper than ever in this room, but not because there are a lot of military people in the room. It is civilians who are pushing militarization in the American state today more than the military. That is, that you can be more militarized than being a military officer. That is, one has to figure out who to watch when you're watching for militarization and the creation of a national security state. The one military officer who's been invited for this very small policy meeting is the commander of the base in Tampa, Florida, where one of Laura's and my colleagues taught for a while. And he has been invited by Rumsfeld particularly because he is the commander, this is out of Tampa, of the Special Forces operations in the world. And they come out of Tampa, Florida. And he has been invited because the Special Forces are going to play such an important role in Rumsfeld's vision of where the Defense Department is going to go and where U.S. foreign policy is going to go. And here's what they're going to talk about. They are going to talk about how to do two things. How to expand the military's intelligence operations around the world in a way that can sideline Congress, and that is that Congress will not be notified, Congress will not be authorized to say yay or nay on any military intelligence operation the way they would be under the law if it were a CIA covert operation. And secondly, the idea of this meeting is to make sure that the Defense Department, which is called down on the Potomac, the DOD, that the DOD manages to steal some of the CIA's turf. This is the agenda of this meeting. And one of the striking things is how much you can talk about this meeting without thinking a single feminist thought. All right? I mean, just think how easy it's been in the last 30 seconds not to think a single feminist thought. It's so alarming. Who noticed? Yeah, you notice they're all men, but, I mean, that's not even the most alarming part. Right? And that is how it is reported. That is how it is debated. It is debated as if the fact that there are no women in the room means that women are analytically, explanatorily irrelevant. But what, in fact, if you think about this group of men in the room having a contest of masculinities with the U.S. Congress and the CIA? Because I believe if one had a feminist curiosity, that's one of the things you'd listen for. To what extent will the Rumsfeld effort, with the backing of the White House, I should say, to expand the Defense Department's intelligence operations depend on feminizing, if you can believe it, the CIA, and feminizing, which is much easier, Congress? I think there are many things going on in this room, but one of the things going on is the game of feminization. Who can feminize whom? And that has always been a game in any militarized state. It's even a game in a non-militarized patriarchal state. and it's something to listen for. I do believe that one of the ways in which Rumsfeld and Feith and Cambone and Wolkowitz will win this game is by portraying both Congress and the CIA as not up to the job. Scene 2. Now we're in Baghdad. It's also the middle of January, and now we are in the car with John Lee Anderson. Some of you are New Yorker readers. Right? John Lee Anderson is a really wonderful reporter from Baghdad, and he actually has now a book out collecting his New Yorker articles, but this is one that's not in the book because it just came out in the January 24th issue of the New Yorker. And John Lee Anderson is doing a profile for the New Yorker of Iyad Ilawi. Ilawi is the current interim prime minister selected by the Americans, the U.S. government. He is the interim prime minister of Iraq until his successor is chosen by the newly elected National Assembly. But John Lee Anderson really counts himself as very lucky because he has managed to get an interview, a personal interview with Ilawi. Now he's going to interview him at his official residence, that is of the prime minister, in Baghdad. And he describes what it's like, as a good reporter, he describes what it's like driving to Ilawi's official residence. You have to go through, not surprisingly, a number of checkpoints, a number of security barriers. His driver is male. All the security personnel that he has to get through to get to Ilawi are male. And he gets through the second checkpoint, and now he's on the road to Ilawi's residence, which is right outside the green zone, which you've probably heard about, which is the most secure part of Baghdad, where all the Iraqi and U.S. officials do their business and make their policy. It's just outside, and he says it's quite surreal. You pass the second set of barriers, and you're heading towards Ilawi's house, and you realize you're in one of the elite neighborhoods of Baghdad that were where the privileged lived under Saddam Hussein. And what he noticed was that you passed abandoned villas, but then you also passed a park that he could remember because he had been there before the U.S. invasion. And you can see the rusting Ferris wheels, the neglected carousels that are still sitting in the park in the middle of Baghdad, but now in a security zone. So he arrives at the house, and he meets yet another set of male security guards. And he finally sees Ilawi sitting outside, as he says, on a chair in the sunshine, dressed in a corduroy shirt and informal attire. And Ilawi, the only other person that is right there with Ilawi, is his American bodyguard, probably a contract worker. So he meets Ilawi. This is now, remember, John Lee Anderson meeting Ilawi with his bodyguard there after having gone through all the barriers. Men as far as the eye can see. Yes? So Ilawi is very gracious, which evidently he can be. He can be really turn on the charm. He charmed the MI6 of Britain as well as the CIA. He has a lot of charm. And he was an operative for both those intelligence agencies. And so he welcomes John Lee Anderson, man to man, and has him sit down, and is very cordial. The sun is out. They sit outside, and this is John Lee Anderson writing, he calls out to his two Asian maids, tea or coffee? And then John Lee Anderson goes on, I thought, two Asian maids? Two Asian maids, are they Filipino? Are they Sri Lankan? Are they Pakistan? Two Asian maids? Who's ever talked about any of the Asian immigrant workers who have stayed in Baghdad? Two Asian maids? I was reading this, I won't give everything away, in my favorite lunch place, which those you know don't tell. And I literally, I just put it down. I thought, 2 Asian maids? What are they doing there? How'd they get there? So now let's start thinking about where all the women are and how many women it is taking to create, not necessarily successfully, a U.S. national security state and to perpetuate the war in Iraq. Let's see who it takes. Let's make the women visible that seem to be invisible or seem to be so marginal that they are causally, that is, they don't explain anything. They are causally irrelevant. Because one of the things that I've been taught over the years, Laura and I have worked together in many capacities, but I'm the learner, right? I'm the learner. One of the things that I've been taught over the years is that feminist questioning isn't just about what are the impacts on women. Feminist questioning is about, if you take women's lives seriously, what can you explain that you otherwise can't explain? That's a much more radical assertion. Yes, always ask about impacts, no matter what is being decided, no matter what options are being put up, whether it be about Social Security or about rezoning of JP, always ask what are the impacts on women. But even more radically, ask if you took women's lives seriously, as diverse and as complicated and not always as heroic as you would wish, if you took women's lives seriously, what would you be able to explain about the world that you otherwise wouldn't be able to explain? So, let's take some women. And, Azita, stand up. Clarky to Clarky. How many Clarkies are there in the room? Look at all these Clarkies around here. Oh, see? And Clarky's over here. See? Clark is small, but we are everywhere. All right. So let's, Azita, you are a white woman in the San Francisco Bay Area. Your name is Kim Gorski. Now, everyone who I'm going to give a name to, we actually know about. That is, I haven't made up. Anyone I give a name to, we are not making up, right? Kim Gorski, you are in your early 30s. You live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and you are married to Mike. And Mike was in the U.S. military, but he got out of the U.S. military and because he wanted to pursue a civilian career. And so he decided to go into banking. And so he's got kind of a junior executive job, but he's pursuing his banking career in the San Francisco Bay Area. And you and Mike don't have kids yet. You have decided to go for your real estate certificate license. But Mike decided that he would join the San Francisco National Guard after he got out of the military. We all laugh now, but who knew then, right? So he thought, and you thought that was okay because he was very enthusiastic, and he thought, well, that was doing something patriotic several years ago. And furthermore, he thought, you live in the San Francisco Bay Area, what are you going to do? You're going to rescue people from earthquakes. And he thought, well, that'll be a good thing to do. So he, did his weekends, and then he did his 2 weeks in the summer and so on, and you thought that was great, and you were pursuing your real estate certificate. And then Mike is called up. Now, we know this because a woman reporter of the New York Times thought Kim Gorski was an interesting way to make sense of the early months of the Iraq War. Right? It took a kind of imagination on the part of a reporter who then had to sell it to her editor, mind you, to think that this was an interesting story. And it was a front page story. It wasn't a style page story. Because it turns out that if you listen to Kim Gorski, not just Mike, if you listen to Kim Gorski, who's now on her own, so to speak, Mike is now left. Luckily, he works for a bank that has decided to continue his pay while he has been called up. This is not required by law. By law, the only thing a company has to do if you are called up from the reserves of the National Guard is to save your job, right? They do not have to pay you anything. But his bank for whatever reasons, decided he's going to continue to pay. So they're feeling kind of okay financially. But you, Kim, you felt that you had to stop your studying for your real estate certificate. Why? Because now you've been called upon by the Defense Department, you are not in the military, to play a very important role for the U.S. military's war in Iraq. This is now, when you're interviewed, is 2003. Militaries learn. And when I don't mean that makes them smarter. Right? That is that like every organization, organizations generate lessons. And lessons are usually learned after the last event. In this case, the U.S. military began to generate new lessons after Gulf War I. Now, this isn't brand new. And a lot of you know these stories. But one of the things that has happened in the U.S. military that really makes it distinctive from any other military in the world now is how explicitly sophisticated they are about mobilizing the women in the lives of their male soldiers. And so Kim Gorski is 203. She is now the object of these lessons. And therefore, she has been called upon to be the morale perpetuator of all her. Mike is an officer, captain, I think, not very high ranking. But he has enlisted men under him, all of whom have women in their lives. And Kim has been called upon by the State Department, by the Defense Department, outside the military and with no pay and not under the law, to keep up the morale of all the women in the lives of all the enlisted men under Mike. That is her patriotic duty. That is her ability to make a contribution to the nation. And so you've given up your real estate job because you are having to do so much work with all the women in your husband's unit, all the women in the lives of your husband's unit. Kim Gorski makes the Defense Department nervous. She says she's willing to do it, but she is beginning to get so many calls, and now let's leap to 2005, from women in Mike's unit who are afraid their husbands, who've now come home after a year, will get called up again. And she, at 2 a.m, is supposed to persuade those women to keep supporting their men to re-enlist, to go to the next tour again. Nobody talks about Kim except one smart New York Times reporter. But inside the Defense Department, they are very nervous. They think about Kim. They think about Kim a lot, and Kim makes them nervous because Kim can persuade Mike not to re-enlist. Kim can decide she won't do the job of boosting the morale of the girlfriends, the fiancés, and the wives of Mike's male compatriots. You stand. Just don't go away. Okay? Dum da dum 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 da dum. Okay, you look too comfortable. Come on. Great. You are Nemo. You are Nemo. This is Nemo, everybody. Nemo is in her early 40s. She's in Baghdad. She is an Iraqi woman in Baghdad, and we know about her because a woman reporter from the Washington Post decided that a woman who was running a small, pocket-sized beauty salon in Baghdad would be interesting as a way to understand the war in Iraq. And so Nemo runs a beauty parlor that's about the size of this back room, and it's on the back street of Baghdad. Nemo doesn't describe herself as Sunni or Shia or Kurdish. She doesn't describe herself by party. She's a small businesswoman. That way, how do you do that? She's a businesswoman of a small business. All you English professors. And Nemo is really running a political salon. She would never say this. But when she's interviewed, what she describes is the conversations that go on amongst her clients. Now, the women who come to her beauty salon, we know, some come with their head covered. Nobody in Iraq, no women in Iraq wear things on their faces. It's just a matter, do you cover your head and how much? Some women come for their perms and their nails. All the things that Laura said I know nothing about, so I will not pursue this. Some come with their head covered, some don't. Nemo herself doesn't wear a headscarf. But what happens in this beauty salon is talk. And this beauty salon, this little room, this little place where you sometimes have electricity and you sometimes don't, you sometimes have running water and you sometimes don't, this is a place where you can talk safely. And what do her customers talk about? What the Washington Post reporter who sat there and listened as if, I think I'll sit here because it's a political place, right, in this beauty salon. And what the reporter overheard were discussions about policing, about security, about social pressure, about family tensions. And what she heard was a discussion about the feminization of insecurity in one of the few places that felt secure enough that you could talk about insecurity. Stay standing. You look too comfortable. Come on, stand up. This is Eileen Donnelly. Eileen Donnelly. Carol, where are you?
I'm grimacing when you say the name.
See, there is one other woman in the room who follows Eileen Donnelly. Does anyone else follow Eileen Donnelly? Well. Oh yes, now see, we're trying to be good to Josh. Okay. So Eileen Donnelly is somebody that in fact does have political clout. Eileen Donnelly is you're head of the Center for Military Readiness. Now, military readiness, a lot of you are discourse types, aren't you? You know. Okay. Readiness is a term that gained potency, real potency, like you could wield it to get your way in policy, right? In the Reagan era, in the 1980s. And readiness means are the trucks repaired? Will Mike refuse to come because Kim is afraid to let him go? Readiness is how able are you on a moment's notice to in fact mobilize the military might of the United States or the military might of Fiji, all right? So readiness, Fiji's very important. It's one of the main UN peacekeeping groups. We could talk about Fijian feminists if you want to. But Eileen Donnelly is one of the operatives, politically active women in Washington who has had disproportionate influence on the debate of where should women be in the U.S. uniformed forces. And Eileen Donnelly has, I would say single-handedly, but that's not true. She is part of a network that is probably most famously including Lynn Cheney. These are really important women to watch. It's not just Lynn Cheney. There is a whole network of anti-feminist, Washington-based women who know how to affect policy inside the bureaucracies and inside Congress, and now, because of Lynn Cheney's access to the White House, inside the White House. And Elaine Donnelly has taken on for herself the main mission of trying to roll back the role of women in the U.S. Armed Forces. And Elaine has become particularly energized since Gulf War I, because Gulf War I ended with a victory for those women in the armed forces and in Congress, people like Barbara Boxer, to try and roll back the exclusion of women into anything called combat. Now, in American gendered politics, combat is always in quotes. Elaine Donnelly never puts it in quotes. Feminists always put it in quotes because it's elastic. It is wielded. And Elaine Donnelly believes that the security of the United States is undermined by putting more and more women into close combat or combat roles. She speaks the national security language. She speaks military readiness language. She knows how the system works. And the fact that none of us in the room, with the exception of Carol, know who she is means she's even more effective. And Elaine Connolly this week is in the Boston Globe because, and rightly so, because she is alarmed at how desperate the Pentagon has become for troops, that they are beginning to, in fact, shrink their notion of combat so that they can use women in more and more places. All right? That's why it's a shrinkage. So Elaine Donnelly wants an expansive notion of combat, because that means you can exclude women from a lot of roles in the military. The Army, not because they're feminists, but because they're desperate, don't ever confuse the two, the Army, in fact, wants to shrink combat, so the definition of combat, so they can use women almost everywhere except in frontline infantry. Elaine Donnelly is very important. You still with me here? You're beginning to, let's remind who everybody is. Kim Gorski. Nemo. Elaine. All right. Let's have somebody from out here.
You could never confuse any of us with looking comfortable.
Yeah, I know that. That's great. That's great. Kate, come here. Come here, Kate. This was Kate, but it's not anymore. This is Kawkab, K-A-W-K-A-B, Jalil, J-I-L-I-L. And, you see us?
Back in the hall.
Yeah. Are we media savvy or what? All right, stay on camera. Kawkab Jalil is in Baghdad. She used to be a manager for the Iraq State Electricity Corporation. She lost her job under Saddam Hussein in the 1990s, and the Saddam Hussein regime really changed its gender politics from the 1980s to the 1990s. Don't ever imagine that a regime, any regime, including the Saddam Hussein regime, stays still in gender politics terms. After Saddam lost the first Gulf War, in fact, he became more dependent than ever on the religious conservatives who he had tried to marginalize in the early years of his regime. And so after 1991, this is oftentimes true after wars, particularly after wars that are lost. After wars that are lost, there is a great incentive for men who feel a loss of esteem because of the loss in war. That's the militarization of masculinized self-esteem. Right? After the loss of a war that so many men felt meant a loss of their own masculinized self-esteem is often the times when at least some men begin to think they have to tighten their control on women for the sake of boosting their self-esteem that has been damaged by the loss in war. With me? This is Kawkab Jalil, who is the target of that post-war post-1991 war, loss of masculinized self-esteem, and also the loss of Saddam Hussein's popular base. And so her loss of job was for the reason that she would not join the Ba'athist Party. And she said she was very courageous, and she said she would not join the Ba'athist Party, and she was kicked out of her managerial job at the State Electricity Corporation. Now, she says, it's happening all over again. Because now the pressure on her is coming not from a regime per se, it's coming from her relatives and her neighbors, because she doesn't wear a headscarf. You don't wear a headscarf. And that never used to matter. Some women did, some women didn't. It was very mixed in Iraq. But now, because of the loss of self-esteem because of the U.S. military occupation, there is increasing pressure on all women who never used to be pressured to wear a headscarf to put on a headscarf. And now we're going through post-war II regendering of politics in Iraq, and you are refusing to wear a headscarf. And you have decided to join and help found a organization called the League of Iraqi Women. And you've told reporters that, in fact, your top priority in this organization, your whole organization's top priority, is to make the violence against women a political issue in contemporary Iraq. You've held rallies. How many of us have seen lots of news about the rallies? Right? Not newsworthy, right? But there have been rallies. And Jalil and others have organized those rallies. They've also organized petitions. You've taken a petition to first Paul Bremer, the U.S. Occupation Authority head, and now to Alawi, to try and increase police seriousness about violence against women. And you have met with marginalization. You have met with silence. And so for you, the issue of violence against women becomes a way to test whether this government and whether the occupying authorities actually do care about the well-being of women. Okay. You all got Kotab here? Okay, just two more, and then I'm going to ask, maybe I'll just do one more, and then I'm going to ask you all a question. Oh, dear. Oh, you have a lot of people to think about here. But I think we better introduce Nasran. You're Nasran. Yeah. Don't you feel like Nasran? Sure. Yeah, sure. Okay. Right. Great. You are Nasran, and you also are Iraqi. Now, you don't come from Baghdad. You come from the south. You come from Najaf, which is a very conservative city in the south, mainly identifies as Shia, and the real powers that be in Najaf are Shia clerics. Right? But you are running for office. You are on the ticket Sunday. Nasran, and Nasran's full name is Al-Fatlawi, so watch for her name on Sunday. And you are running for the Najaf Provincial Council. Now, according to the rules, 1/3 of all candidates running on Sunday must be women. The hope is that 1/4 of all the National Assembly seats, the equivalent of Congress seats, that 1/4 will end up being women. But here's the thing. Nasran has to be part of a political party. The way the elections work on Sunday, and this is now, okay, political science 101 coming up to the fore, it does matter what your ballot looks like. And what the ballot looks like in the Iraqi elections on Sunday are party lists. You are not going to be voting for individuals. You are going to be voting for party lists. One of the things that women in other countries, feminists in other countries, are astounded at when they come to the United States, and I know Azita knows that, I know Elora knows that, I know that Rita knows that, I know a lot of you know this, but it's a reminder. One of the things that feminists in other countries are astounded at is that American feminists don't think a lot about political parties. But political parties matter. And what a woman who has her own ideas, who has her own gumption, who has her own history, has her own agenda, does with being part of a particular political party matters. Nasran, you are part, and I'm going to read it all out, not just say the acronym. You are part of the party that is called, and you've probably all heard about it, the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. It's called SCIRI, S-C-I-R-I. It is one of the most powerful, newly organized parties since the U.S. invasion. It is part of a coalition that also includes the Daqwa Party and several other parties. You're running for a local council seat, but it's the people running for the National Assembly seat that kind of run your ticket. Now, there was a meeting held in Najaf, and this is why we know about you. There was a meeting held in Najaf just 3 days ago, and at that meeting, in fact, a number of women candidates came together. They didn't all agree. They weren't all running on the same ticket, but 4 of them kind of moved to one side of the room and quietly said that they had an agenda, if they got elected, that wasn't simply a religious agenda, even though they are running on a religious party ticket, so this is all sotto voce. Right? They didn't put themselves on the ticket. They don't run this ticket, and they are not going to run what happens to parties after Sunday. But what you said was, look, I'm already working for an organization that is trying to get computer skills passed on to women and trying to increase formal education for women. And what Nasran said to a reporter was, I think jobs are the most important thing for women. I don't think Islam's place in Iraq's life is the most important thing I'm running on. She was really glad because her picture wasn't put in the paper. Right? Okay. Let's remember who we are now. Could everybody remind, Kate, who are you?
The woman who's organizing rallies against violence against women.
Jalil, you lost your job and now you're being pressured to wear a headscarf, right?
Kim Groisky, officer's wife.
Right.
Elaine Donnelly wants women out of combat.
Nemo, I run a beauty parlor in Baghdad.
Yeah, Nasran?
Nasran, sorry, and I'm running in the election on Sunday.
Absolutely. Okay. But now, folks, what other women should we be thinking about? What other women are holding up the system or resisting the system or have to be marginalized so the system can continue? Who else has confusions? I won't give everything. Condoleezza Rice. You want to be Condoleezza Rice? Come on. Yeah, right. Another Clarkie. Yeah. You're Condoleezza Rice. And what are you thinking these days? Just give us a sense. Just give us a little bit of sort of this week, kind of what you're thinking.
Very confident in my position in the Senate confirmation hearings because I'm held up by a very stable political militarized system. And I can choose not to respond to tough questions and blow them off as issues of my integrity just because of that system and not be asked further questions.
And you are the second woman to ever be
and the first black woman.
And the first black woman. Absolutely. This matters. Who's going to be a security mom in the U.S.? Let's have a security mom. Who in the election didn't quite like the label, but gosh, that is how you kind of thought of yourself when you went to vote. Anyone want to be a voter in Illinois? Yeah, come on, stand up. Great. Describe yourself a little bit. How did you think about this? Do you like being called a security mom? Does that capture a little bit about sort of how you've been thinking about the world?
Yeah, I'm scared of those terrorists over there, and they're pretty scary. I'm scared for my kids. And,
yeah, right.
I think we need a strong leadership in Washington to take care of these guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Who else do we? What other women are we missing in the room to make sense of how this world works? Who else?
Soldiers.
What? Soldiers.
Tony said it.
In which army? Come on, somebody. This is not a group of shy women or men, right? Come on, somebody. Who you want to be another woman? What other women should the media be interviewing? Not because they're necessarily good, not because they're necessarily powerful, but because, in fact, if you took them seriously, you'd be able to make better sense of the world. Who else?
Alawi's maids?
So be one of Alawi's quote-unquote Asian maids.
Okay. It's the most secure position I've had. I feel really safe. I feel like I'm making the money that I need, or almost enough money that I need to send home to my family. Mm-hmm. And you put up with the sexual aggression. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And you've got at least another woman working with you.
Yeah, I've got another woman working with me. Sometimes we get along. Sometimes we're competing for attention. And because the resources are slim, and we always want to be in the favored position because we need to be very self-protective in this situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Who else?
Oh goodness, a Humvee.
Yeah, yes. So your husband's thinking about. What do you think?
Well, I want my car.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that my car could guzzle as much gas as the Humvee, perhaps.
So you're not against the Humvee per se, but why should he buy the $50,000 car when you can't even get a car to go to work?
Right. Maybe we should have two cars that together will eat up as much gas as the Humvee.
Right. And so do you think you're going to be able to win this argument with him? Does he control the purse strings, or do you?
I'd say it's a battle.
It's a battle, in good militarized terms.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
We'll end up with the two cars.
We'll wind up with the two cars. There's a strategy going on here. Who else? What other women should we be thinking about?
The wife of I don't know his name, but like the wife of the main guy who's been accused of sort of coordinating all the torture at Guantanamo Bay, who at least as of like last week was in court and was trying to uphold this argument that what he did, or what his lawyer was trying to uphold, was what he did might not be construed as torture, just making prisoners do things that are humiliating. And
you're his wife.
And I'm his wife, helping him strategize his way out of it, because we have kids, we have a mortgage.
Right.
He had a secure job. He doesn't have it now, and I don't want to get screwed holding like all this responsibility and have my partner taken away from me.
And furthermore, you figure he was just doing somebody else's job anyway.
Yeah, he was following the orders of Bush. I mean, it's Bush's fault. Why should my husband take the blame? Why should me and my family suffer for this? And frankly, if I were that woman, stupid enough to marry a guy like that, I would do everything within my power to get him out of it.
Yes,
because I mean, that's a humongous disruption of the entire life you had.
This is how marriage works. Marriages, as many of you know, are really complicated, and they are not disentangled from the larger political system. And decisions made inside of marriage do affect state politics, and state officials know that. Right? They don't just know about Kim. They know about how political marriages are. Thank you all very much. Just give everybody a hand, please. What happens when you try to look at, not just take seriously every one of these women, but actually follow the breadcrumbs from every one of these women, is you realize, as Laura said, you've got more questions than you had when you began. What you have the feeling is that the system, in fact, is more fragile than you imagined. That, I think, is one of the great revelations of feminist thinking and feminist sleuthing. That is, if one pays attention to women, you realize two things. One, that most political systems, not just the United States, most political systems are perpetuated by the wielding of more kinds of power than most people ever imagine. When I think now of what I didn't ask about at Berkeley, when I was at Berkeley as a political science graduate student, and in my first, God knows, 10 years when I thought I was a realistic political scientist. The thing I look back at now, and Carol and I talk about this in the interview, is that I perpetually underestimated the kinds and the qualities and the extents of power that have to be wielded, usually invisibly, in order to sustain the unequal, unjust, and oftentimes militarized power system that exists. The second thing is, if that much power has to be wielded on that many different sorts of women, what happens when they become conscious? What happens when they begin to realize that they are the object of interest, of state interest? Then they have the capacity. We have the capacity, in fact, to upset. Not necessarily overthrow next Tuesday, but upset. Make look less secure. Make look less invincible the power system that exists. Power systems usually look invincible because they look inevitable. They are not inevitable, especially, I think, if we ask feminist questions. Thank you very much. You're great. Questions, comments, stories. We love stories.
Can I make a brief announcement about questions? As you've noticed that we are taping. This is for making available over the web for people who couldn't be here tonight. There are a few of them. So if you ask a question, just do know that you'll be on camera. Probably the back of your head will be on camera. And if you have questions that you don't want to ask on camera, I'm sure Cynthia will be happy to talk to you about them afterwards.
And I'll try to repeat the question because Josh says we need to repeat it into the mic. Great. Yes, hi.
Hi. When you began, you described that scene in the Pentagon with those many civilians and what they were, catching. And I'm not sure about the exact facts, but I think most of those civilians had not experienced combat themselves, either defensively or offensively. They're the kind of, sort of career militarists who never really went to war.
Right.
Because there are a lot of those in the Republicans and in the White House.
Yes, especially since it's been the end of the draft, or the most formal draft.
Right. And so is there something that you can say about the sorts of people who are interested in this national security state and the militarization, and in contrast to that, the people who are actually experiencing war, many of whom don't have power, and when they come back won't have power because of where they are in the social stratum, and how that kind of disjunction will get us into worse shape if we somehow don't elevate those people with that combat experience. And one of the reasons I'm asking that question is because my father was a World War II vet on the German side, and the Iraq War, this one, is bringing up all kinds of stuff for him, and it's because it's an urban war. And the first Gulf War was in the desert, and Vietnam and Korea, they were in the jungle. And so this one, with the urban part of it, makes him remember more than any other war has. And so, and obviously that we have all those armed forces now experiencing the horrors of war. But we have all the people in power who don't have the sensitivity to what that means. So
this is a real puzzle, and I think it's a puzzle in every country. This is a puzzle in Japan. Yes.
You don't need to repeat it.
You got it. Great. Did most of you hear this? Because it was really important, and thank you so much for giving us such a context for it. It's a real puzzle in Turkey, in Japan, in, believe it or not, Finland, in the U.S., in many countries, and that is who has the most credibility when speaking about war and war making. There is a temptation to imagine that the most credible person to resist war making is the warrior. That is, this summer, Gilda and I and several others were able to be at the Veterans for Peace national meeting that was held here in the summer in Boston. And what was so striking, these were mostly men, but some women who are now caucusing inside the Veterans for Peace. But what was most striking to me was how much credibility they had, because in fact they had done it. They had been to war. They had not necessarily been in combat, but they'd been in uniform. They'd been somebody else's troop, and they came out against the war. How different it is than Gilda or I or you coming out against a war or against a war-making policy. Do you see what that does? First of all, in most countries, it privileges some kind of masculinity. Not all kinds of masculinity, but some kind of masculinity. In the United States, only about 5% of living veterans are women. This will grow a little bit over the years, but not too much. Secondly, it means that you get credibility for talking about war by having been a war wager. That militarizes authority. It says who has the authority to speak about war. Only those who have gone to war, not those for whom war has been made upon. On the other hand, and this really is very much about Washington politics today, it is certainly very salient in Congress and in the bureaucracy and in the general media that if one can speak as somebody who's been there, and there means war, preferably if you can, something called combat, it's very salient in the my masculinity is bigger than your masculinity game. And that is a very powerful game in American politics. It is not a very powerful game in Canadian politics. It is not a very powerful game in Dutch politics. It is today not a game at all in German politics, right? It is not a game today in Japanese politics. It is not a game today in many countries' politics, though some. But it is a game, a serious game of who gets treated as credible. If we imagine that somebody is most credible speaking out against war when they themselves have been a soldier, what we're doing is saying that 95% of all women have less credibility than a great number of men. So yes, it is true that within the Pentagon politics and within veterans politics, there is a lot of, Cambone, and Wolkowitz, and Feith, and Rumsfeld. Well, who are they? Yes, that game is definitely a salient game. We should find it an interesting game. We should watch the game, but we should know that we are watching a masculinity versus masculinity game. And it's not the game that should be a substitute for serious democratic discourse and debate. But it is, in this society, a very serious game, and it is being played absolutely on the banks of the Potomac. Absolutely. But it is a boys' game. All right. Somebody else with stories or questions? Yes, hi.
Can I stand up because I'm not very visible?
Yes, please do.
Yes. I'm British, and it's important to my point.
Yes.
I was reading the article this morning in the Times by, I think it's Thomas Friedman, which struck me as very distressing in lots of ways, because it was saying the useful thing that Bush ought to listen to what the Europeans are saying about him and take it seriously, because he'd be more credible if he listened. Not that you actually might listen to what they're saying, but he'd be more credible if you listened. And so I spent most of the day thinking about this. I just recently come back to the States. I live here half the time. And it's a very interesting position to be in, to live half in the States and half in Europe. Because what worries me particularly about the present situation is the way that terrorism has become the rhetoric all by itself, which justifies everything. Obviously there is some, I would say, relatively small danger that people in a village in Montana might be attacked by Al-Qaeda. Pretty small. But the mentality in the States is making it credible that the small village in Montana can physically attack someone who looks Arabic because he or she might be a terrorist. Now, I've been to this country 5 times in the last year. My fingerprints are all over because every time I come in, I put my fingerprints on, get photographed, cheerfully or not. I mean, I'm used to now coming into a country which I am a stranger in, as far as the boundaries are concerned. But what's worrying me is not that. I mean, I understand that you have to have procedures. What worries me is the mentality behind it. And as a European, 2 things strike me. One is that we lived in Britain for 25 years with the IRA. We're used to terrorism. We're used to thinking, okay, maybe I'll get blown up if I go to Harrods. We're used to thinking that, it could happen. We've lived with it. And before the IRA, only 15 years before that, it was the end of the war. We were invaded. We were not invaded. We were always about to be invaded. We've lived in Europe with either actual or possible invasion. You mentioned your father. You haven't, as a nation. You've never been invaded, and that's why it's so frightening. And why these little boys, who are big boys, of terrifying power, are reacting as they are, is because somebody has actually finally frightened them at the playground level, in the way that the boys and the girls in Europe learned to live with the threat of terrorism, the threat of attack, the threat of... So I'm worried more. I'm worried about things you're talking about, but I'm worried also by the fact that what we have here is a terror of terrorism, which is being responded to in little boy ways, which are terrifying. I'm frightened of Bush. Thomas Friedman was making snide comments in the article about the way that Europeans always laugh when George Bush's name is mentioned. They certainly do. But the point is, we laugh with a very deep worry, because that man can destroy all our lives. Not because he's a Republican, that's not the point. Well, it's not entirely the point. because basically he's an isolationist for a nation for whom isolationism has been a protective armory for a very long time, which is now being punctured or being threatened. And that's what I'm worried about, is because, and we have to take that larger view of where the American psyche, the American male psyche, is in the international scene, and why Europeans of both sexes and all political parties are very worried indeed by George Bush and by American policy, and also make terrible jokes about it, and basically despise it, and also are very frightened of it. I mean, the rest of the world does not envy America, as Thomas Friedman says. They are frightened by the power. I mean, one thing Thomas Friedman said, he's actually said, the naive optimism of Americans is something that Europeans joke about, but in fact envy. We don't. Naive optimism is what 12-year-old kids have. We don't give 12-year-old kids the power to run the world.
This is really important. In fact, we have right here, we have Sandy McAvoy, who is a colleague of Elora's here, who is doing her dissertation on the actual reality of and the images of women who join terrorist organizations. So we have a lot of feminist new research going on about this. But one of the things that we've learned, and there are a lot of people in this room who've been in the anti-violence movements, who've been in the battered women's movements, who've been in anti-rape movements, and one of the things we've learned as feminists that we always have to ask the gendered question about fear. How is fear manufactured? Who is made to feel the protected and the protector? Right? That fear is not something ungendered. Fear is constructed, perpetuated, or dispelled through ideas about masculinity and ideas about femininity at an early age and at a later age. And there are feminists in the world who are doing a better job than we are in trying to understand this. And I will end with, we have one more question to go? One more question. But let me just, because I want us in this room, we're part of the world here. And I just had an email message from a Turkish feminist named Ayşe Gül Altınay. And Ayşe said that one of the things that they are so worried about in Turkey is that the Turkish feminist movement, which is a very vibrant, smart movement, the Turkish feminist movement, one of the things they've been trying to do is to dispel the culture of fear in Turkey by rewriting textbooks so neighbors are not, in Turkish, called enemies. That is a pretty common textbook language for school children in Turkey, to refer to neighbors, Russia, Iran, Iraq, Greece, especially Greece, as enemies. And so one of the great successes, hard-won and still tentative, of Turkish feminists is to demilitarize school books in Turkey by getting neighbors to be called neighbors, not enemies. Because to do that means that the Turkish army then will have a less prominent role. If you think you live with neighbors, you are less dependent on the military for your own sense of personal and national well-being than if you think you live surrounded by enemies. So Turkish feminists are figuring out how to do this. We in the world here, we have to really listen to Japanese feminists. We have to listen to Turkish feminists. We have to listen to British and German and French and Italian feminists. We have to understand how masculinity and femininities are manipulated to create the culture of fear, and how they can both be reimagined to dispel the culture of fear. One more question, observation, story. Yes, hi.
When we map the power dynamics in in this national security state, I think it's very important to pay attention to fear and the entire huge cloud that terror plays. And when I think about the power influence of this current administration and its enormous wielding of influence in terms of corporate entities, not to mention politics, of course, an entirely new kind of desperately repressive social agenda, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And how that so completely infiltrates every aspect of our culture and a global culture as a result of the power that this country plays in global politics. How ironic it is, especially in the aftermath of this past election, how everything was turned upside down. How the privileging of, for example, the first question that was raised, the privileging of military experience was inverted, so that John Kerry was discredited and in fact, sort of feminized, not as a warrior soldier, but as somebody who was much more of a wuss than George Bush was, someone who spoke French, and how we overcome that in this culture that's so incredibly powerful, in this political atmosphere of such hegemonic dominance, that what usually plays out as normal kinds of interplay, that where even even the boys can't be boys. You know, so where, you know, women's voices are so completely marginal in this that the prominent women's voices, the Elaine Donnellys, are masculinized, and the liberal male voices are feminized and marginal.
Yeah, I mean, your point is so well taken. That is, the wielding of masculinities and the wielding of femininities is not just a joke, right? I mean, it seems so funny sometimes. We turn it into a joke. But, you know, I've always thought that, you know, when they've said for years that feminists don't have a sense of humor, I think what they're really worried about is we have a great sense of humor. Right? And I think we have to really take this all seriously. We have to support those women who have the guts to speak out and not be afraid to be thought of as naive. We have to listen really hard to all the women in our lives who in fact don't get it. We have to be really interested in that very high percentage of married white women who voted for Bush. One of the biggest gender gaps in this last election was between married women voters and non-married women voters. We have to be really interested in this. I think in this room we've got so much energy and so much brain power and so much curiosity that in fact we can destabilize what looks like a all too stable system. It is not. This is the secret. It is not that stable. Thank you.